This is going live on Facebook. Okay, I see it now. I'll have to update. There we go. Okay, I just need to update the privacy on it. That audience, public. And I'm gonna also just title it quickly. Shamanism versus sex shamanism. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for being patient with me, Adam, as I just set this all up. So we are here live today on my series called Temple Conversations, which is a series of podcast style interview conversations I have with people who have been initiated into some flavor of sacred sexuality. So far, it's been everyone I've interviewed has been an ISTA grad. ISTA is the International School of Temple Arts. Both Adam and I have attended a few trainings and also assisted some. And yeah, I crossed paths with Adam in a recent training that I did called Compassionate Depossession by Betsy Bergstrom, which I was clued into through an interview I did with Bob Falconer, who is I would say, like the head honcho of the intersection of internal family systems and spirit exorcism. And then when I asked him, who else is doing quality work around the US, Betsy's name was top of the list. And yeah, it was quite a fascinating workshop. Adam has done it, I think, a couple of times now. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite a fascinating workshop, like a very thorough procedure to firstly admit the reality of spirit beings and then learn how to interact with them in a manner that their presence doesn't cause suffering to humans in this physical realm. And in that, yeah, I remember seeing you, and I had the sense that you're probably initiated into Easta or something like that, and it turned out to be true. And then I don't even remember how it emerged, but I just remember being like, oh, this is a conversation I've been like dreaming to have, which is, and I've thought of different names for it. Like this one I proposed to you, Adam, was shamanism versus sex shamanism. And it's the subtitle could be use or misuse of eros in shamanic spaces. Like that is kind of the theme that I want to explore. And yeah,
Totally.
I'm here now. And Adam, if you'd like to share thoughts, give an introduction, would love to hear.
Yeah. Thanks, Vignesh. Appreciate that. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Um, and yeah, good introduction. And I'll say that there's something about Eros that is so fundamental to what it is to be human or to be alive. Whether one conceptualizes it as God or evolution or whatever, somehow Eros is the thing that creates generations. I mean, basically, we're all here as the result of an orgasm somewhere. And in this study of life and the human experience and what we can do to deepen and to grow in this experience, it seems like so many schools miss this really essential part of what it is to be human. And, in some ways for good reason. Uh, when bringing eros or sexuality into a space often can create complexity and can bring up challenges and trauma triggers for people. And so it's important to be held well and to have, a lot of, guidelines around, how we can bring this into space, especially when it's considered in a healing capacity in this sort of sacred way in which we're talking about. Um, and it's so funny and a bit tragic to me that in all of the healing modalities out there, so often eros or sexuality is excluded when it's such an essential part of who we are. And this conversation around shamanism and sexual shamanism, I see there's a lot of overlap and a lot of similarities. And yeah, I'm excited to get into this with you.
Lovely. Yeah, it's really interesting because we had planned the conversation last week and then we had to reschedule it. And something significant happened in the last week for me, which is, yeah, quite a tender reveal. Like, I actually have not shared it publicly yet. Is that I got baptized yesterday at a Christian church that I've
Oh,
been going
congratulations.
to. Thank you. Yeah, I've been going to pretty regularly for the last 3 months or so in this journey of what is the right way of releasing spirits that don't belong inside a human body from the human body that they're troubling. And where I landed was at this church, and I've seen some fascinating things at this church where um, by tapping into the spirit of Christ, it feels like people are releasing so much. And in the moment before my own baptism, I was walking forward to the stage. This church is like a Sunday morning rock concert, like at 10 a.m. They're like, it's a rock concert to Jesus. And you can go up to the stage and kneel in front. And I have enjoyed doing that. It's like a really beautiful way of supplicating to God. And as I was doing that, I was trying to go there, but there was a guy standing in front of me, and I placed a hand on his back to ask him to move, but he wasn't budging. And then I just stood there with a hand on his back, which is the common form of healing in this modality, which is the people who are the prayer helpers hold a hand on your back and pray.
The laying
And
on of hands.
yeah, I mean, I'm not very well, yeah, I suppose so. I'm not very well versed with like Christian culture in the US, but yes. And, uh, and I just stood there and I really just felt, and then another brother joined and he laid his hand on another shoulder of this guy, and at some point it was like an 18-year-old guy who also got baptized with me actually right after me, and he just started weeping and crying and releasing. And prior to that there was a woman who was like puking into a bag as someone was praying for her. And for me, having gone through ayahuasca, having gone through sacred sexuality of the ISTA flavor, having touched a little bit upon compassionate depossession of Betsy Bergstrom flavor, and then this, yeah, it's such a spectrum of touch involved in each of these different practices that are inherently, the way I see it now is like, I'm curious how you orient around it, but a lot of the terrible suffering in human beings happens because of energy intrusions. Like something has intruded into the energetic body that I have or you have, and because people struggle to address it at the energetic layer, it create like people try to solve it at the physical layer, and it's just difficult to solve it at the physical layer, and they suffer. But it's such a wide spectrum, like in ISTA there is an aspect of touch at the sacred spot, which is either the vagina or the anus. And I'm aware I'm revealing some things that we are not supposed to reveal, but this is fairly common knowledge now in the sacred sexuality world. Um, but yeah, I'm curious how you orient around it. Like there is so many flavors of touch, physical touch, energetic touch. Because in the compassionate depossession work, we can just do this over Zoom without any touch involved. And yeah, like my question to you is like, why is touch needed? Why is eros needed at all for healing? Like why not just place hands on the back of humans and allow whatever needs to be released to released?
Yeah, wow, there's a lot in what you just shared. Yeah, at first, Vignesh, just want to say, yeah, congratulations on your
Hmm.
baptism. And I hear that you, yeah, felt really touched by Christ and this, yeah, this Christ consciousness coming in and through you. Uh, and yeah, as you mentioned earlier, this, coming to the reality that there is a spirit world, that there is, this level of reality, this energy that we interact with when we're in the material world, and um, maybe some more than others have the chance to sort of feel through the veil in this way. And that's what I see is really the core of shamanism, is the capacity to be with the different realities, with the different dimensions of the physical and the metaphysical, the body, the spirit, the soul, sort of all at once, and to be able to go sort of in between these realms. Um, some people are able to use substances in order to sort of connect with the level of consciousness that can make it easier to feel into this, but that's really not required. And I think, true shamanism doesn't have to rely on a substance, although it might include that. So the question of why touch, why is that needed? We can do many things through Zoom. I know I've certainly done a lot of compassionate depossession work over Zoom, and it works. I tend to have a preference for doing things in person when possible, and yeah, and I have clients all over the world, and so being able to do this over Zoom is not just convenient, but it still works. I think it shows that we are connected in this realm. The way that I hold it is that we are connected through consciousness, and so that's how we're able to tap into this way of being close, of being able to work with these healing capacities without having to necessarily be there in person. And we still live in this body. We still have this matter that we get to attend to, and so much of what we've seen in the development of trauma healing over the last 30, 50 years is the understanding that we store trauma in our body, that we have these experiences, energetic, emotional, mental, where something gets stuck, where we're unable to process what's happening at the moment. Something catches our breath and is beyond our capacity to really integrate what's happening in that process, and that trauma gets stuck somewhere. And so for me, the most effective trauma healing modalities all really start with the body, or at least include a really fundamental level of embodiment. Things like somatic experiencing, I think, are, especially for deeper layers of trauma, often really fundamental. Um, I've had the experience myself of being able to be in more traditional talk psychotherapy for years, and being able to talk around something and to feel like I'm making progress, and then to get to the point where I could include my body and like really, get through the layers of dissociation, this sort of armor that I had developed as a way to not feel the pain of the trauma that I had been carrying. Of course, as Brene Brown would say, like, we can't selectively numb. And so anytime we create this armor as a way to shield ourselves from the uncomfortable parts, we also shield ourselves from sort of the rest of the experience of life. And being able to hold a client as they're going through their own embodiment process, and whether that's shaking or crying or like a cathartic emotional release, um, that definitely is an important piece of being able to process the stuck energy that's there in the body and in the emotional context. And I think there's a different layer that can be available when somebody who has done a lot of that work themselves and can show up in a really attuned and present way is able to hold touch in a way that can allow the client's body to unwind. Um, and you mentioned sacred spot, which there are some things from ISTA that we ask people to keep confidential as far as rituals goes, basically, so that we don't bias people's experience coming in. There's not anything that's like necessarily harmful in this. And I will say that this has been on the ISTA website, that Sacred Spot is part of the ISTA One experiences. Yeah, that's known, and so I don't think we're revealing anything that we shouldn't there. And Sacred Spot, which I've heard it described as basically any place in the body that we can hold presence with, hold hold, both pressure and presence that will allow trauma to release. And so this could be somewhere even on the face, that just, holds this kind of tension that's related to stuck energy. And of course, some of the most essential and fundamental energy that we hold is around our sexuality. In more Eastern kind of traditions, what would be called the first and second chakra, that this is really related to where our survival comes from. Very like early childhood development, really what it is for us to feel safe existing on planet Earth, often are related to these really kind of base layers of our body. And so having a practitioner that can hold attention and hold presence and a very particular kind of attuned touch. And the tricky part here is that this might touch on Eros, which is in some ways like it's like working with fire. It has incredible potential and a big capacity to transform, and it can be really easy to sort of get out of control. And so, in my experience, it takes practitioners who have done a tremendous amount of work on their own sexuality and capacity to hold Eros, to be able to feel what's happening for them, feel what's happening for their client, and to like not make it personal, to be able to hold this sort of in the transpersonal realm, and to be able to hold presence while somebody is perhaps going through some of the deepest trauma unwinding of their life. And I've seen things resolve in, say, an hour and a half long sacred spot session, that I think might have taken months, even with a more embodied sort of trauma release practice, much less comparing to traditional talk psychotherapy. And I'll say I grew up with in a Christian context, and I had my own journey of being able to find a way to include a lot of other aspects of spirituality, and Yeshua, as I call him, has a very special and significant place in my heart, and I know that that's a being that's been with me sort of my whole life. And as scripture would say, like where two or more are gathered together, like, there's this additional power. Like that's God comes through in a different way where people get together, and there's a lot of work we can do on our own, a lot we can feel, and when we have the chance to be with a practitioner who has been through this journey themselves, who has had to integrate this level of healing, and to get to sort of the depth and the core of their own process, then the capacity for them to hold space and to hold somebody else in that process, I think, really get to a deeper layer and can be much more potent and effective than things we could do just feeling on our own.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing the thorough response. And I'll admit the question was intentionally provocative in some ways, like really pushing this in this like almost I believe both of us have engineering backgrounds. Is that right? Yeah. So it's like
Yeah, I studied neuroscience in undergrad and engineering management in graduate
okay,
school.
cool.
My career before I went into the spiritual realms was in medical device development and commercialization.
Okay, got it. And this would be a perfect segue actually into the next curiosity that I had. But I want to note this that there is this like notion of stress testing, like any principle that you might have that is a brick in the system that you create. You in the engineering mindset, you stress test it to see if it is actually needed. If it is not needed, then can you even reduce the number of axioms of the system that you're trying to create? And that's kind of the orientation I have had around creating healing frameworks. Like, what are the key pieces needed, and is the aliveness of Eros necessary at all, or is it? And so that's kind of the perspective from which the question came, and it was helpful to hear you speak to and kind of expand upon the sacred spot principle, and that resonates with me. That's often how I've also described it, and as you expanded upon that, I realized that in how I presented it concisely in my monologue, I focused on two of the specific sacred spots of the many sacred spots that could exist in the body. So I appreciated the broadening of that into like, yeah, there could be, where can you hold touch with presence? And it reminded me of like, oh, there is so much shame in the culture that we live in to hold touch with loving presence on certain parts of the body. They are like often neglected, and the rare scenarios, situations where they are touched, they're often touched with this like taking energy, like when,
Agenda, maybe.
yeah, like kind of
Hmm.
wanting to extract something out of that touch. Me on myself, me on someone else. That is the common flavor of touch that those parts of the body receive. And yeah, it's been a while since I've dabbled in the ISTA, so it was helpful to like be reminded of that. And you had started kind of sharing this a little bit, but would love to hear more of your story. Like, you've had like a corporatish career, and now you're pretty deep into these different modalities and I really admire how you have kind of glued these different pieces together, including constellation work, which is something I haven't trained in yet, but I got a beautiful demonstration from you of how it can be used to glue together compassionate depossession and internal family systems. So yeah, give us a little bit of a story of who is Adam Harvey, and how did Adam Harvey become who he is today?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Vignesh. Yeah, I'll say, I really just wanted to follow my curiosity and follow this question of like, what makes the world work? What makes human beings make the decisions that they do? And so for me, neuroscience in college was where I started, and always what was the most fascinating thing, just like how the brain works. It's like this organ trying to understand itself. Like what's more fascinating than that, right? And yeah, through much longer story short, I while I was in college, I earned myself a diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Mm,
Uh, and I had quite a number of different risk factors, ancestral and from brain injuries, and um, I was both studying neuroscience from the academic perspective and then having to understand what worked for my own healing. I
mm,
basically came to a point about halfway through college where I didn't understand the decisions that I was making. Where I saw like reckless behavior. I was like, this doesn't feel like me, and I don't know what's happening here. And so
mm,
that for me kicked off a process of going on medication and starting therapy. And sort of going in the more kind of conventional medical route as far as trying to understand, what could help me heal, while also really wanting to just like lean into the edges of research and of the new understanding of what makes humans work.
mm,
And I found a real love for medical devices, in particular like brain scanning. So my first entry into that was in EEG brain scanning,
mm,
and eventually found my way into a North Star of a career that used medical devices in a therapeutic capacity using light, electricity, or magnetism, and that could replace pharmaceuticals. I saw that for me, pharmaceuticals, at least for some time, felt really necessary, especially when I wasn't willing to sort of change everything else about my life.
mm,
And I also saw the risk there that they could be treating symptoms without really getting to the underlying root.
mm,
And so, I had this very defined 10-year career plan. And my intention was to work for a large company for long enough and I had startup experience before that, and wanted to have some more stability and, get through grad school and understand sort of what global scale medical device distribution looked like, so I
mm,
could, take that to a startup and help scale these kind of, neurotech devices was really what I was most interested in. And yeah, I made it about 7 years into this 10-year career plan. And, I had my dream job, absolutely, was traveling internationally often, with working on really exciting projects, high tech devices, and also getting to, how we could help the developing world, and, wanting to create much more scalable and affordable kind of solutions for the next billion people coming online in healthcare. And, and I had what I can now relate as the beginning of the soul initiation,
mm,
the understanding that I had sort of accomplished all the things that I had wanted to by that point in my life, Had the job, bought a house in my 20s, had the kind of relationship that I wanted. Um, and I didn't feel satisfied by that. It's like something deep inside me was like, nope, this isn't it. Yep, I like checked all the boxes, and there's like something missing. And for me, this process into the soul initiation sort of coincided with the dark night of the soul, which I think many people go through. Um, Much easier when one has the context that there's a purpose behind that. That there's like actually this is like a journey into the underworld where I come out sort of a different person. Uh, yeah, I didn't know that at the time. It was, oh, this is another depressive swing, and I just don't really know what it's going to take to get through this. And yeah, much longer story short, I left the corporate world not knowing what was next. I figured I'd take a couple months off and then go back into startup life, working with similar kinds of devices. And I did a breathwork journey a couple days after I left the office. And this is a sober but shamanic experience. And I felt so vividly called by the energy of death to be a death doula. No, I was aiming at like a director of marketing position for a neurotech startup. Like that was not on my radar at all. And sort of had this like, what what was that? Like the felt experience felt so true, so real, so alive. But my mind did not really know how to make sense of it. I like, looked the next day at some death doula training programs, and it's like, this doesn't really make sense. And then I had 3 people close to me all start the dying process right around then. And so this was the middle of the pandemic in 2020, and I spent the next 6 months basically traveling to be with 3 of my closest people as they were in the death process. Um, and sort of letting go of when I thought I'd be getting back to work, and basically, letting go of the identity that I had around my career, and the ego that I had really identified with, my contribution to the world being in this particular kind of a work. And still tried to keep this like following the golden thread of curiosity, following the places where I felt called. I was introduced to constellation work, and this is the first place that I really had a more reliable way to get in touch with my soul, which is really difficult to describe, but this sort of like inner sense of like knowing, and this kind of this compass of like, oh yes, I've like found the things. And yeah, that led to me becoming, going through a training for family constellation facilitation. I spent 3.5 years on staff in hospice and also working as a private death doula. And yeah, about 2 years ago, I started my practice called Awakening Ancestry. So constellation work is still the majority of what I do. Family constellations, where we're working with ancestral, intergenerational trauma, basically helping find and resolve patterns that we've inherited, either directly kind of picking up on what our parents do, or indirectly where we'll take on a pattern for an ancestor maybe that we've never even met as a way to sort of integrate what the family couldn't. And IFS has a similar kind of perspective where if there's something that happens that's beyond our capacity to integrate that and it turns into a trauma, that there's a part of us that kind of splits off. And this happens in the individual level, and we have these inner children, these inner parts that we get to tend to. And sometimes before we know how to meet them and how to work with them, they can act up in some ways, trying to get attention, basically because they're trying to be integrated, trying to find a way out. And we do this individually, and the family does this. The whole family system does this as well. So we can take on patterns for ancestors, where it's basically the family trying to find a way through, trying to find a way to integrate some energy that wasn't able to be integrated at the time. And constellation work can go really deep and can include sort of anything. That's part of the basis of constellation work, is radical inclusion. We have to be able to include all of the parts of ourselves, all the parts of our family. That means being able to hold even the perpetrators in our family as part of our own lineage. And it was through constellation work that I found my way to compassionate depossession. Basically, entities started coming up in my constellation work and started kind of interacting with me directly, which was a little scary the first couple times that happened. And it's a sense of like, this seems important. I should probably learn what to do with this. And so that was how I found Betsy in that training. And yeah, the constellation work has for me also expanded to things like working with past lives, which I have no attachment to whether somebody believes that. If they don't believe in past lives, it won't come up for them. But many people do have the experience of having a soul trauma, something from, they've carried from a different incarnation. Yeah, curse and thought form unraveling, which is also one of Betsy's teachings, soul contracts, that sort of thing. And yeah, these days I also support people in working with psychedelics, which is legal basically in Colorado, and support those working with sacred sexuality. I'm not offering these things publicly at this point. This isn't ways I'm putting myself out there as a practitioner, mostly supporting other people who are more advanced, and whether that's supporting them in trainings or organizing events for them, trainings, that kind of thing. But yeah, these 4 things: constellations, death work, psychedelics, and sacred sexuality, are the things that I found most potent for my own healing. Coming back to this stress test and really trying to find like what the simplest ways to create the system are. I had the chance to really go through a really wide variety of healing modalities, starting with the more conventional medication and therapy, up through neurofeedback and neurostimulation and meditation and yoga, and changing my diet and getting sober, and these 4 things that I work with, really this, awareness of death, tapping into the healing power of Eros, working with, sacred psychedelic medicines, and in constellation work, are the things that I found most potent and most efficient in my own healing journey. And so this is how I've oriented my own practice, is around the things that feel most efficient and most effective.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that great overview of what brought you here. And I resonate with you deeply about going through. I think you used a phrase, you were like, you now refer to as the dark night of the soul, but when you were in it, it was like, oh, another depressive phase, here we go again. And yeah, I'm curious, there's like many threads that I could go deep on, and the first one I'm going to pick is that moment where you realized entities were real, or like spirit beings were real. Did that happen in were you doing like is that even a thing? Do people do constellation work with themselves? Did that happen with a client? Like, tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, it is possible to do constellation work on oneself. I only really see other facilitators do that. Not recommended for the most part, because it's so easy to have our own blind spots. Part of what constellations is really good for is getting at the hidden dynamics of things, and our egos, our shadows, are so good at protecting themselves from being seen. Yeah, I'll say that first I had experiences when I was a little kid of seeing entities and being really scared by that. I remember asking the pastor to come over when I was asking my parents to, I was 5 or 6 maybe. Basically, I could feel or see an entity in my bedroom, and I was, really scared and overwhelmed by this. And I was like, oh, of course, we're supposed to call in the pastor. And so we did, and that felt better. And also, there felt like there was something like, yeah, that sort of feels like something was missing. Like, I feel better and appreciate him coming over. And also, there was no sort of interaction with this being. It was sort of like, you're not welcome here, get out. It was, a little bit more in depth than that. And I think, like many children, I, around age 6 or 7, sort of turned off some of this capacity. It's, I think, part of a natural part of how kids develop. And yeah, I'll also say that I had a sister that died when I was 3, and this I think created sort of a tear in the veil for me, as a way to like, this connection that I felt with my sister meant that I think it was easier for me than for many people to sort of see on the other side of the veil, or see between layers of reality there. And I swung a far atheist for some time. Really went like science, engineering, rationalism, objectivism even. And
that's a part of the initiation ritual into science and engineering, becoming atheist.
Yeah, it's helpful for me to feel like, oh, this is what I believe, and not just this is what I inherited as a belief. And for me to come back to the point where I can include the aspects of religion and spirituality that I grew up with, without feeling restricted by that, has been quite a yeah, beautiful journey I'm really grateful
Mm,
for.
mm,
Um, and so, in my constellation training, which my teacher, Jack Blackwell, is one who has been on sort of the leading edge of working not just with family systems, but with other sort of influencing energies out there.
mm,
And so in my training, there was a place for things like entities and malevolent beings and things like that. And in the constellation language, basically they were always held within representations. And so whether that was a human or an object that was holding this representation, that was how I learned in training to work with these energies, which is not common within constellation training.
mm.
And I was facilitating for a client here in Boulder, January last year.
And when
Had
that
been
was introduced to you, like, was there a, were you open to that, or were you like, oh, this is fishy, this feels off?
Um, at that point, I was open to it. I had spent, a couple years studying and working with different shamans, and so it felt like I was finding that layer of what I would call reality already.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I felt so called to Jack's training,
Mm-hmm.
and just so much trust in that process that
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, it just like I could feel the way it resonated in my body. I was like, yep, this is true. And then also,
Mm-hmm.
in the constellation work, we see it as phenomenological, which means that we're really working with what arises in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I could just see the way that this would play out as like, people that have no idea, no context about a client, no backstory would be able to tap into energy from that person or from that person's family, um, that even the client themselves wouldn't have known how to describe. They're like, that's exactly the thing that my grandfather would say, or that's that mannerism that you just did. Like, that's exactly my uncle. How would you ever know that? It's like, oh, they wouldn't know that consciously. They're connected through,
Mm-hmm.
through the greater non-local consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so, yeah, I had a place for these, for entities and things like that already. And what was new in this constellation, I was, working with this client, and it was a fairly advanced client, somebody who has been studying shamanism for years. The group of representatives that gathered to support this client, basically everybody had been studying shamanism in some capacity themselves. So this was not a random group of people that just found me on Eventbrite. This happened to be a really kind of special group that was pretty developed in a lot of these ways. And there was basically an entity that came up. This was a really intense energy that it was first a person holding, and I suggested like, oh, let's use a floor mat, basically, like let's use an object to hold this, so that there isn't a human that has to sort of be with this energy. And so this person sort of transferred the energy from their body into this floor mat, which if one hasn't seen a constellation, this might sound kind of out there, it might not make sense. That's okay. And what was different from what I went through in training is that this energy sort of started to just come out from the floor mat and started to interact with me directly. And this was basically a felt sense of my own energy body. And what happened is that I felt this energy coming up and coming towards me. And I made the decision to really just like I just kind of dropped into an altered state. Like there was no substances involved, but really just felt the intuitive sense that I was supposed to open my system as much as possible and point this energy up.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt it come in and through my body and just like looked up and sort of like pointed things up and to the light. And um, and the entity was gone. And the rest of the group that had been sort of orienting around this entity being there, sort of like, well, we're like, where the mat's there, but like, where did this thing go? And it's like, oh, it moved through me actually, which I didn't know what I was doing at the time. It was just sort of an intuitive sense that this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, my medicine teacher, shaman that I've worked with, is actually staying with me at the time. He was in Colorado as I was organizing some retreats for him. And the next day I was talking to my therapist, and my therapist was like, "You don't quite seem like yourself. Like something seems a little bit off." And I was like, "Yeah, I feel off. I don't quite feel like myself." And so I went, thankfully, just a couple doors down to this teacher of mine's from Europe. It's like, "Hey, I had this thing happen yesterday. I feel a little weird. Can you help me out?" It's like, "Oh yeah, "Oh, you ate the entity." It's like, I what? It was like, "Oh yeah, you move the entity through your own body instead of sort of coaching the client to move it through their body, which is where it was in the first place." I was like, "Why did you do that?" It's like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really know I had a choice in the moment. Something that Betsy said the first time I went through her training was that it's possible to be sort of asked to stand in as a gateway, as a threshold. That this is not a thing to offer, to make a practice of. But that was the moment that I said, like, okay, there's something real here. I felt this. I saw it in the group. Um, something happened here, and I didn't know what I was doing. This seems important. I should really go figure out what to do about this. And so, yeah, that was when I signed up for Betsy's class, and she's a really phenomenal teacher. Yeah, I had the privilege of going through even her intro a second time around, which is where we met. Um, just because I just so appreciate the way that she relates to the spirit world and the way that she's able to incorporate things from quite a variety of traditions.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So this particular entity that you first had encounter with, that you ate and released, I have two questions on that. Firstly, was that present in one of the people, or was it from the space? Do you have a sense?
It was present in the client.
In the client. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So this, as we set up the constellation, and for those that aren't familiar with constellation work, basically, we have the chance to have external representations for different energies, be those things within us, things within our family system, things in the world. Could be wars or immigration, like just events. And in a group, and if you've seen Sex, Love, and Goop on Netflix, or the show Another Self, this is typically what's shown is that other people will take on a representation, will hold a role for that particular energy. And in one-on-one work, or it can be done with objects as well. So we have the chance to basically expand the system for a client into these different representations, so that we can interact with these parts of the system and interact with the system as a whole. We often have this sense that we have the right idea, like we have the right perspective, and we often hold that perspective without having really tested what it's like to hold other perspectives in the system. And so in constellations, we get the chance to really hear from and feel what the different parts of the system are saying and are telling us. And so as we expanded this client's system and chose representations for the different part of her experience and what she was going through, this energy was something that she wasn't consciously aware of, but sort of came out. Basically, one of the people, one of the humans they're representing, had this energy come in and through her and said, like, I have this thing happening for me now. It's kind of scary. What should I do? And so that's when we started to work with it and decided to put it in a floor mat instead of having her carry it. So yeah, this was in service of the client, and something that the client had been carrying since childhood. But wasn't aware, but could see after we finished the session, could see like, oh, here's ways in which this energy has actually been impacting my life, impacting my family, my relationships, and it sort of became apparent in past tense, although it was under the surface.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, there is a few different threads coming alive in this, and this is actually a great setup for the crux of what I wanted to explore with you in this conversation is entity exchange during erotic encounters, whether they be in a healing container or in a romantic container. And yeah, I want to share a personal anecdote related to this, which is that I was before the compassionate depot training this winter. I forget when it was. Was it last year?
February.
February. Okay, cool. I did a stepping stones training, which is basically equivalent to IFS level 1, but it is open to people who do not have a therapeutic license, and it is organized by this organization based in Canada. And in that, I really like that training, really well designed, very well finessed teaching material, and then the practice sessions themselves felt like well thought out containers where people had different roles, and especially with your um, family constellations orientation, like it felt like there was a template of a constellation being created for every
Mm.
practice container. um, and in one of those practice containers, I ended up releasing an entity. And as I was releasing the entity, it was this like gnome kind of creature, garden gnomes. I maybe pronouncing it wrong, GNOME. And it had this like, yeah, it was very silent, but as I was releasing it, as I saw it separately, it just very quickly dissipated. And this is like I think the second entity I have released from my system. When I worked with you, that was like the third entity I released from my system. And before that, I had a major journey with Bob Falconer that allowed me to release my very first entity, which was this like sadistic, sinister Joker archetype that
Mm.
I had picked up during one of my. I believe I'd picked it up during one of my instances of like childhood sexual abuse.
Mm.
But this particular entity that I released, as I released it, I had the clear sense of, oh, I picked this up in a romantic encounter. Like it wasn't with me for a long time. It was something I picked up from a lover, and that was a pretty significant moment for me to kind of acknowledge the energy exchange aspect of physical sexual interactions. Like I had like heard the idea prior to that, like intellectually, and it kind of made sense to me. But when I had this experience, I was like, oh, there is so much going on that I don't have visibility into. And yeah, like I'm curious now that you have, and actually, I wanted to share another piece related to Hinduism, which has a lot of idol worship. And in my recent explorations of Christianity, and I've also been like exploring Islam in relationship to Christianity, there is so much of an emphasis against idolatry. Islam takes a very militant has a very militant opposition to idolatry, and Christianity has, in my experience, a more like, oh, let's not do this, let's not worship idols. And then I was attending a workshop this weekend on iconography, which is kind of orthodox imagery of Christ and the apostles and the saints. And there is like a lot of principles laid down during the Byzantine times to ensure that the icons don't become idols. And I haven't dug into what those principles are, but
Huh.
it almost seems like I'm very curious what those principles are, because it's like related to this process that you described of releasing the entity into the mat. And in a lot of Hindu temples, there will be these ceremonies to like call in a spirit being and establish it into the idol, which is then worshipped. And
Hmm.
I believe it like creates karmic contracts between the people that are worshiping the idol and the entity in the idol, and the entity kind of takes care of things at the spiritual level as long as the idol is taken care of. And it like opens up this like whole domain of like broader domain of, yeah, it seems like these entities want physical existence. Like they really
Mm.
crave physical existence, either through the form of idols or through like possessing physical human bodies. And then when human beings interact sexually, and I'll make one more plug into like the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I haven't read the book, but there's a beautiful movie by Gaspar Noé. I forget the name of the movie, which is inspired from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it really beautifully depicts this experience after death of entering the what is called the intermittent state, the bardo state of being, where disembodied entities are floating around trying to look for, it's almost like all they can see is orgasms and nothing else, and they are like almost floating around looking for a moment of orgasm, because in that alchemy of an orgasm they can transcend the limits that have been imposed upon them of being disembodied and enter into physical existence.
Hmm.
um, so yeah, I'm, these are the different things alive in me, and I'm curious with your perception that you have around entities coming alive. How has that changed your sex life? How do you bring that to sacred sexuality spaces? um, any spaces where eros is alive, like how do you distinguish, how do you ensure you don't end up eating entities again just because you've wanted to, romantically engage with someone you're attracted to? Like, those are some of the curiosities that come alive in me.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Vignesh. Yeah, no, a few threads in there. The first thing that I want to say is what a special experience it is to be a human. The way that I hold it is that there's a much larger spiritual reality that we have the chance to come into these bodies temporarily uh, and to interact with the material world. And especially knowing that that is not going to be, our forever existence, that these bodies are temporary and that, we will surrender to death at some point. Like how incredibly special and privileged it is that we get to
Truly.
have this spiritual experience where we also get to interact with the material world. And especially in Western culture, it can be easy to forget that we are souls first. That's at least the way that I hold it, and it's spiritual experience that's being lived out in these bodies, in this matter, and that there might be a lot of other spirits, being entities that are really curious, really interested in what it's like to be, to be able to interact with matter in this way. And as you might recall from our compassionate depossession training, a lot of the entities, a lot of the possessions out there, um, are actually humans who had an interrupted process in death, who were maybe really scared of dying. Perhaps they, were in a religion that held a lot of fear or judgment around death or what might happen after death. Perhaps death was traumatic and was some big surprise for them. Perhaps they really didn't want to leave for some reason. Maybe they had children that they really wanted to be there for. But most of the what we would call sort of garden variety possessions out there are people that that were human and just kind of got stuck, kind of got lost, and weren't able to sort of follow the light in going into the death process, and are then kind of stuck and unsure of what to do. And so there is often a sense that they're looking for a place where they can reside and can take energy. Um, and this is part of what it is to have a possession, is that there is a being there that, even if it is benevolent in many ways, is still sucking energy from that person. There's still a drain of life force. To say nothing of of the beings that might not always have the best intentions in the people that they're interacting with. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think there is this sense of these spirits that are maybe wanting to find sort of a safe place to call home, because their body is what was holding their soul while they were alive is has died, and the rest of them sort of hasn't caught up with their reality. And uh, and it is possible for these beings to cross from one person to another. And your question around how this can sort of transmit in sexual or erotic spaces, it's an important one. My best understanding is that it's not something that happens super often, and that the way that a human would take on a possession, of course, this is almost all of the time, this is completely unconscious, but related to basically sort of holes in our own energy, mostly related to the ways that we relate to ourselves. And this is where I think, IFS and other forms of our own personal work that help us feel more whole are really important, because it's the places where we feel like we're missing something, that we're more likely to unconsciously take on energy that sort of fits this perceived lack of some sense of self. And so I don't hold it as a necessity that if one person has a possession and they have sex with somebody else, that's naturally going to transmit this possession to the other person. But I think under some circumstances, especially where somebody feels really compromised in some way, some of the classic ones, or if they've been in some deep depression for a long time, drug or alcohol addiction, severe trauma that has not been resolved. That these create conditions where it's more likely that somebody will attract an energy that will then sort of siphon energy off of them. And the ways that we connect with other humans in the deepest ways, like, yes, sexuality can be part of that. And I think especially where there is a deeper level of attachment. So if somebody just has sex with somebody else and it's more casual, there's, I imagine, some very small chance that an entity could pass from one to the other in that context. And I think it's much more likely when somebody's really, opened up to somebody and is really, maybe they're feeling in love, or they're feeling a lot of longing or connection to somebody else, where they've really sort of opened up their attachment system to relate to this other human, that's much more likely to be able to come in there. So I still think this is a pretty rare occurrence, and that it matters much more, what somebody's vulnerabilities would be otherwise, basically related to the state of health of their own system. But it is something that can happen, and I've definitely seen that in my clients as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating juncture we have reached, because your sense, both of those senses that you shared, that it's a rare-ish occurrence and that it's less likely in casual sex, but more likely in like attached sex where like someone's opened up. My innate sense contradicts both of those. Like my innate sense is that it happens all the time, and that it happens more often in casual sex than in like a committed loving container. And yeah, I'm very curious as to how like the juice of this exploration for me, when I reach a place where someone's sense and my sense are like 180-degree apart, which this is a pretty juicy place. It's like, oh, how did I reach where I reached, and how did you reach where you reached, and what is it about us that orients us in this manner?
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up this sense of a difference of opinion. I'm curious to see what comes in as we get into this. I'll say, as far as casual sex goes, my first question is, why is somebody having casual sex? And if they're doing that from a place of feeling not whole in themselves, if they're approaching sex as sort of like an addiction, where they're really doing that to try and get a need met that is actually not going to be met by that, in a similar way to like the way that an alcoholic drink is never really going to meet somebody's deep need that they might be reaching for that drink for. So in that context, it might be that somebody is reaching for casual sex because they are in a really vulnerable position, might be in sort of a kind of an addictive state. And I think in that context, it's not so much about the sex themselves, it's about the state of consciousness they're in the first place. And if you were to take two people that could have casual sex maybe once or twice, and then expand that to like maybe those people go deeper and that they have a deeper chance to open and to be in more of kind of an attachment, I think it's more likely to happen as they were to open up more and to be more in sort of an attachment thing. But if somebody is having casual sex, or is working with prostitution in some way, that no judgment there, but there's risk, especially when it's not held in a particular level of consciousness. So yeah, I would say it definitely does happen with casual sex. I just think, given the same two people, it's more likely to happen if they were more connected, if they were more open to each other.
Interesting. Yeah, this reminds me of like because it's almost like it seems like we're talking about two things, but actually in my mind there are three things now. One is like kind of casual, disconnected sex, like kind of numbed out sex, like avoidant sex, you could even call it. Then the other is like sex where you are intentionally or unintentionally opening up, and I think that's where the attachment system comes into place. Like you're getting attached, you're getting entangled, probably like codependent entanglements are happening.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just like more channels being created, and then you could have a casual sexual encounter where the two people are so attuned to their energetic body that they're like being very clear as to what they're opening up and what they're not opening up. And this is more like the sacred sexuality RDBDSM conversations, and not to say that people who have our BDSM conversations are all doing this, but it's like it's the holy grail of that sacred sexuality realm of like, oh, let's be clear what we are doing here, let's be clear what we are opening up to each other. And I can see how, yeah, I think what you are speaking to is perhaps, or in your original comment, you were speaking to perhaps this realm of encounters versus, yeah, what I'm talking about is, in response to that, is more about almost like committed marriage containers where the intention is to create life and there is like deep love, and both the humans are like reasonably evolved, where there is an understanding of attachment and a desire to not develop codependencies. And in those containers, I imagine the sexual explorations would create avenues for just really more and more release of everything, like a release of grief, a release of um, external entities that are like caught up in that grief somehow. And to kind of take this a further step forward, I want to bring in the teachings of both Jesus Christ and the Buddha in relationship to sexuality, which both of their suggestion was to be celibate if you can. And I'm kind of mixing things up a little bit. I'm pretty sure there is a specific biblical verse that scripture that points to this, like where Jesus asks his followers to be celibate if they can, and if they can't, be in a committed, loving relationship with one other person and satisfy each other's sexual desires, so that neither is caught up too much in lust, which then creates openings for external entities to come in. Like that is the framing presented in that verse. And on the Buddha side of things, it's like, yeah, become a monk or a nun if you can, so be celibate if you can. If not, then there are a smaller set of precepts presented to the lay followers, the householders. And so there is this parallel that I see there. Yeah, it makes me. Oh, yeah. The question I wanted to ask you was, I'm curious if you have explored this in your own internal relationship to your sexuality, your arousal. Like, I've wondered sometimes if, because we share this physical space with so many beings, whether we are attuned to them or not, and like a schizophrenic breakdown is when suddenly like the vision suddenly opens up before the capacity has developed to discern what is in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm. Like that's how I see a proper like schizophrenic breakdown. And lighter versions of it can be like shamanic initiations, where you have guidance to be able to distinguish like all of the different channels that are opening up. And I have wondered if, when I have sexual desires emerging in me, when I connect to lust, like how often is it my own lust that I'm connecting to, and how often is it like a temporary possession of thoughts where something external is like floating through my consciousness in a moment of um, being not mindful, and I'm identifying with that temporary thing that is floating through me and making it my own desire, my own arousal. And the reason I've had this thing, and I'll add a caveat here. This is not to shame sexual arousal, not to shame sexual desire, but the reason I've had this inquiry is that how did Jesus and how did the Buddha manage to live a radiant life, like not a numbed out, disconnected life, a radiant life without without having any sex at all. Like that's kind of been the pathway. And so I've been sitting with this, like, yeah, how often is it external entities that are driving me towards eros, and when is it like my own eros? And I'm curious if I'm gonna just pause here and curious to hear what evokes in you in response.
Yeah, yeah, quite a number of threads there. Yeah, the first one I'll start is just a bit more about my own personal growth and development with my own eros in relationship to my sexuality. And I'll say I've studied with both ISTA as well as the Deer tribe, which is the um, lineage that holds Kadoshka and shamanic deer armoring, as well as with Charles Muir, who was sort of the first one to really bring Sacred Spot to the U.S. This is where Baba Des and ISTA sort of learned from originally. Um, and for instance, when I went to ISTA, I had sort of these projections about it. I thought, I might go and feel much more free and liberated in my sexuality. Um, and there's a reality in which that's true. And the practical experience of that is actually that I feel much more discerning and selective about how and when I use my own eros. Um, and I'll say it's really common for people to be really unconscious about the ways that they're feeling erotic current in their body, the ways that they're engaging that with other people. It wasn't until I had been through weeks worth of trainings and retreats and intentionally going into this material where I was able to feel the subtleties of how I was connecting erotically with other people from an unconscious level. And I really want to credit shamanic armoring. It's just a 15-day process of using one's own sexual energy to break through basically the ways that we create armor in our emotional body, in our energetic body. Um, doesn't have to do with sex necessarily, but is basically seeing eros as just this essential life force that has a lot of power, and that we can intentionally use that as a way to break through aspects that we've created this armor around ourselves. And so people often who haven't been to ISTA think of it as like, oh, it might be this wild sex party. And my experience of ISTA is actually that it is sort of first and foremost a way to get in touch with our emotional body, and tools that are taught and practiced as far as how we can get in touch with what's happening for us, how we can release this emotional energy as it comes up. And by nature of having sexuality be part of the space, which there's a very defined way in which in which this is brought on, and a very sort of clear set of container and agreements and how we bring this into the group. And of course, no sense of expectation or requirement that people engage or else or anything at all in that in that entire retreat. But just by nature of having sexuality in the space, it means that people's deepest triggers are likely to come up. And I think Esther does a good job of being able to teach people the ways that they can get in touch with their emotions and to move the emotions to stay current and to be able to make decisions then from not a backlog of a bunch of unprocessed stuff, but to be able to make decisions from a clear and grounded place where they're sort of caught up with their emotional experience. So yeah, I went to ISTA and then came back and was much more selective about sort of who I got into relationships with. It's really hard to imagine being in a relationship with somebody who hasn't studied this sort of thing now, just because of, as you mentioned, this, ways we can, learn more about our own energy and ways that we can be more clear. You mentioned RDBSM, which, for those who aren't familiar, that's a conversation prior to any sort of erotic or sexual engagement, or any, relationship that might include that, where you go through, what other relationships might be impacted by us connecting, what are our desires, what are our boundaries, what are, sexual health status, what's the meaning that we make out of this? Like, oh, if I kiss this person, does that mean that maybe we share a kiss and that might be nice and that's it? Or does that mean that all of a sudden we're in the process of building a relationship that's going to lead to marriage and children and grandchildren and like just really getting on board with what the other person's reality is as far as how we make meaning out of this particular encounter. And I also think it's best when aftercare is included of like, okay, does this mean that there's a particular kind of way that I can support this person in the time after this experience, whether that's touch or checking in the next day or something like that. But yeah, you mentioned this RDBSM conversation as a way, it's sort of a proxy for whether somebody is really conscientious enough about how they're using their sexual energy, about choosing to be really open and revealed about where they are, and to understand that from the other person about where they're at before they choose. And something that I got from ISTA is that not every time that I might have wanted to have some sort of erotic encounter, does that actually mean that it's a good idea? And sometimes having these conversations is like, oh, actually, the way that we would make meaning out of this is entirely different. And perhaps I'm actually wanting something that's deeper and more committed than this other person does. And so like actually like maybe that means it's not a good fit. Whereas I think maybe some years ago I would have just said, this feels really good, I really want to keep deepening with this person, and I'm going to try and bypass the uncomfortable parts where maybe we don't have values alignment, maybe we don't want the same things. So RDBSM is a good way to sort of front load like, where might the different sources of conflict come up, and how can we really be present and care for each other in that experience. And then, yeah, you also mentioned Jesus and Buddha and what they, talked about to their followers. And I'll say that I don't consider myself a religious expert. And I also want to make a differentiation between Jesus or Yeshua and the man that he was and what he, represents, and the church. And in particular, the development of what we call the Bible now through the Council of Nicaea, which as best I can understand, was really done with an imperial drive, like really Emperor Constantine wanting to have something that could then be used as a way to further the power of the empire. And from my understanding, the way that this was brought together is like sort of a siege of the people that could collate what became the Bible were sort of forced to do that. And the idea that a spiritual or religious text might have been developed with this sense of power and wanting power over other people and sort of doing that by force leads me to wonder like what might have been missed in that process. So the deepest reality here is that I've read the Bible cover to cover. I don't really understand not only what's all in the Bible but what might have been left out. And I grew up in the church. I'm still close with many people that I was in church or was in youth group with, even though my beliefs have expanded since then. But yeah, I just want to delineate between Yeshua or Jesus and the essence of those teachings, and what has become of the church, and the ways that the power of the church has also been wrapped up in political power and in empire building.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a point of belief that I did not speak to when I made that statement that Jesus and the Buddha were celibate, right? It's like, and of course, there is different layers of sussing out what is true and what is not true that we get into, and the historical context that you presented is true in both cases. Like even there was a big council to gather the Buddhist suttas to like many, I think a couple of centuries after the Buddha's death, and the same happened with Jesus that I'm aware of. And yeah, it's entirely possible that both of them were having sex, and that was kept away from most followers, or that was like kind of excluded. So I accept that possibility.
Yeah, I'm
And
really curious about the sort of what's called the lost years of Jesus, so, ages 13 to around 30. It seems like there are reports of him traveling through India and going through different initiatory processes, being initiated into different spiritual traditions and lineages. And of course, that's just called sort of the lost years in the Bible. And so, I'm curious about the role of like Mary Magdalene and what that held. And yeah, I don't exactly know is the truth.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and as you were sharing this, the wondering that came to me was perhaps it is in the. I'm curious how this framing lands for you, and this is my attempt to create a metaphysical framework to talk about eros and external entities. And the framing that was coming alive in me is that perhaps it is in those moments where two people are engaging erotically while both of them are kind of ignoring something and kind of keeping something in the shadows. That is, and so you have the moment of orgasm, and part of the orgasm is in the light, in the awareness of what those both humans are engaging about, and part of the energy goes into the shadows where neither has visibility, or
Mm.
both are, either they don't have visibility or both are intentionally not bringing it to the connection, but the orgasmic energy is going there anyways, and it's perhaps that is what creates the gateway for external entities to come through. um, and as I say this, I'll also note that I am emphasizing the moment of sexual orgasm as an avenue for spirit possession, and I'm aware that there could be other avenues for spirit possession, but just because of my history of like childhood sexual abuse and kind of encountering spirit possession through that, it can cloud the statistics in my mind. I'm like, oh, everyone must be getting external entity possessions in moments of rape. Like that's kind of where my bias lies. I'm curious how that is received by you.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Vignesh. I appreciate you mentioning that, and appreciate your vulnerability in sharing this. I know this is something that you've shared publicly and talked about before. Um, and yeah, I think it's really helpful here to differentiate between the act of sex and orgasm, and the potential for that to be an opening spiritually, uh, and the reality of the opening that happens with trauma, especially severe, and especially with childhood, and I think most potently with childhood sexual trauma. And so I do think it's possible for there to be some entity transference between two consenting adults, and I think that's exceedingly rare. I think it happens, but it's on the very sort of tail end of the curve, so to speak, on how that can happen. I'll say, what I see with my own clients is that far and away the biggest opportunity for possessions to come in are when there's a really big vulnerability, when there's a really big trauma, especially, and those moments that are significant enough to be considered survival level fears. Um, and we haven't talked about we've talked about soul initiation, but not as much about like soul retrieval. But from that perspective, which is essential to shamanism in a number of cultures, when we go through some really big trauma, that there's a part of our soul that might fracture off. And this is a similar kind of process to what we see in IFS, in the way that a child part can sort of get stuck at a certain age. That basically it separated from the rest of the system as a way to try and keep itself safe, because the thing that was happening in the moment was too much. It was too painful, too hard, too traumatic. And this can happen on a soul level as well. And so the process of soul retrieval, of creating the conditions for the soul to want to come back and be whole, is a big part of the shamanic process in a lot of places. If anybody has read Harry Potter and is familiar with Voldemort and the Horcruxes, and this is basically what this process is referring to: is when there's something that is so threatening to the survival of the soul, that it has to split off in order to, like, maybe someday it will be safer to come back. Voldemort is, of course, seeing this in sort of the dark process, but this is actually really common. Most people, in my experience, have some part of their soul that has fractured off. And I think that more significant than the opening that can happen with an orgasm is the opening that can happen when the soul feels the need to fracture off to protect some part of itself, that is itself sort of creating a tear in the veil. And that's, I think, where it's much more likely that there's some other external influence that could come in. And of course, there's also the consideration of, what is it that's causing that situation in the first place? Where is somebody's motivation for perpetrating? What are some of the most horrific things that can happen to a human? That just by nature of that being the situation that we're talking about. Um, and so, yeah, I do think it's possible for possessions to transfer between two consenting adults, but that's really rare compared to the way that they come in through childhood trauma.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
yeah,
mm,
I'll pause.
mm.
I'll pause there.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I appreciated that framing of like, yeah, moments where and I'm reflecting it like moments where the soul is terrified, and from a protective place it fragments off, like that creates space for entry, because that lands in me as a broader framing of rape. Like rape is one of those instances that could happen, but there could be many other instances where the soul has that response for variety of complex reasons. So I appreciate it, like really is broadening my perspective as I'm receiving it. And I'm curious here, what what supports your sense that this is not a very common thing when consenting adults engage sexually?
Um, I mean, part of it is just from the way that I've seen the distribution in my own client practice. Like it's something that I've seen, but um, most all of the time, that possession is more likely related to some significant childhood wounding, whether that's directly from an event like a childhood rape, which certainly happens, um, or if it's just sort of what it was like to be a child growing up in a family that was dangerous or threatening,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, just the nature of being in an environment where one does not feel safe and does not feel supported and isn't able to really receive or to feel love in that way, um, that sense of living in lack is
Mm-hmm.
what is more
Mm-hmm.
likely to create the conditions where a possession might come in. So
Mm-hmm.
some of that I think is just from personal experience and what I've seen
Mm-hmm.
in clients, um, and when it's two consenting adults that are maybe somewhat conscious, maybe it's not the full RDBSM, and people that can really feel their own energy body and know exactly how they're interacting and how they're merging or not with another energy system. When two people just meet that way, and there's not this sense of really like horrific trauma, then yeah, it's just much less likely to create that kind of a split.
Mm. Yeah, and this kind of ties back into something you shared earlier, which is at this stage in your life and through your journey with ISTA, which has built more discernment in you, and at this stage in your life it seems less likely for you to be engaging in a romantic relationship with someone who, my words, is not at your level of spirit work and evolution, and yeah, and the instance that you shared before, like the very first family constellation experience where you ate the client's spirit, external spirit entity, without even realizing perhaps that there are better ways to handle it. Um,
Mhm.
I'm curious, like, let's say you were engaging with someone who is not at a similar level as you, is carrying um, external entities, whether you can see it clearly or you just have a sense of it. Like, would you be able to show up in a way where you don't eat it, or like are there still like is are there did you discover parts inside you that kind of want, perhaps have like a savior complex or something, that like get a kick out of like eating other people's pain and thereby creating challenge in your system? Like that curiosity is very, like, did you discover these parts in your own healing journey, and now would you, if you were to engage with someone who clearly is at a different level, like how would you just not engage at all, or would you be able to engage in a way where you're not taking on stuff that doesn't belong to you?
Yeah, good question. The first one I'll say is yes, absolutely. Have I come across my own rescuer or savior parts or complex? And some of this is from my own experience. Some of this is from my my family line. I know I can see people in my own lineage that have had this sort of savior rescuer complex. Um, and yeah, just to mention briefly the drama triangle of the villain, the victim, and the rescuer. It's sort of this triad that operates at a certain level of consciousness that is often hard to actually heal through, like to be able uh, to transcend the idea that we're stuck in this dynamic makes a lot easier. And of course, you know, most of anything we're going to see on TV is caught in the drama triangle because it's so compelling for the human experience. Um, and yeah, also say one of the first constellations that I received, I got a sense of my own lineage and my dad's line being involved in the Crusades, and that sense of rescuer from a spiritual perspective is like deep within my lineage, and so it's a thing that I've had to be aware of, and I'm still continually like working with to try and catch the parts of like, where can I show up in service and to be of support to somebody, and to not make it about me, to not make it as a way to get my own needs or my own ego validation. um, and I think that's a thing where I just get to keep finding more layers of nuance, and being able to trust that it's not mine to do anybody else's work for them. That I'm there to be a guide and to be a support and maybe hold the container for what they do, but that the healing itself comes from them. Like it's the natural energy that can come through their system. Um, and so it's not me healing anybody else. It's me helping them create the conditions where they can go through their own healing process. And I'm sure I still have more to learn about ways that my own
Sure.
rescuer complex might show up here.
Yeah.
So I think that was part of what was happening. That first time was, I want to be the one to do it all. I want to be the savior, and maybe I want to look powerful or something. And like, not worth it. And yeah, as far as being able to or choosing to engage with people who aren't doing a similar kind of a work, and I'll say that. There's a friend of mine who has been a sacred sexuality practitioner for I think maybe a couple of decades at this point, and as I started studying this, I think it was after doing a workshop with Charles Muir and signing up for my first ISTA, that she said, like, by the way, if you keep doing this, you're going to be fishing from a smaller pond. And yeah, the reality is that I am probably not interested in dating most of the people that are out there on the dating apps. And that might be a smaller pond that I would choose to engage with now. I would like to think that it's more aligned. And if there's anything that I want to offer to your audience here, it's that there is no substitute for living a life that is in alignment with one's values. And most people, when they talk about their values, if they haven't done a lot of work around this, we'll probably talk about what society tells people to have as values. Like, oh, I have a value for truth and for compassion. And it's like, actually, if you want to look at your values, like go through your calendar and see where you actually spend your time. Go through all of your spending and see where you actually spend your money. Look at your physical space and see what objects you keep around. And that one is always living their values, but most people are completely unaware of what their actual values are. I want to credit Dr. John DeMartini in the book The Values Factor with really helping put this into perspective for me. And so, sacred sexuality has been a way where I get to be more in touch with my own values, and sort of a proxy for seeing other people that are more dedicated to living a life that's really in values alignment. And no sense of what anybody else's values should or should not be. I think our own values are about as unique as our fingerprints. That's really, up to each person, and also that our values change throughout life. This book, The Values Factor, goes through an exercise where it's like, look at each 10-year segment of your life and really try and understand what values you were living at that point. It's not this set thing of like, yeah, here's my value for this life. It's like things change, our values change, our priorities change. And so for me, what's most important is not necessarily somebody's level of development, although that matters to me and who I'd choose to spend my time with, but really, like, are we in values alignment? And, this is one of the things that was tough for me in the corporate world of, I had my dream job and I was out there doing something that felt like it was saving lives, developing medical technology that was actually used for people on the brink of life and death, intensive care and late stage hematology and autoimmune crises and, these actual moments of bringing people back from the brink of life and death. And it was so hard to be able to adjust to the way that my values found their way as I got to know myself better, as I got to find deeper layers of my own being. That it was, yeah, tough to be able to be with that as I was working for somebody else, and as I had somebody else determining what I was doing with my time. Um, and so, yeah, that's really the thing that it comes down to for me is living a life that's in alignment with my own values and finding other people that are also living a values aligned life, and ideally that our values get to sync up there.
Beautiful. Yeah, I really appreciated that. What I'm hearing is a call to integrity, in being true to yourself and what you claim versus like what is transpiring around you consciously or unconsciously. So yeah, I appreciated that. And in closing, I have one of two questions for you. The first question is, since you are not spending much time on dating apps, if like any eligible ladies listening or watching to this podcast want to reach out to you, like what are two or three questions that you would ask, and I'm happy to play matchmaker in that case, and I'll ask these questions for you and like shortlist. Or if that is too embarrassing to answer, on the spot here on this like live stream podcast, the alternate question is tell me three routines that you have really incorporated and you stick to in this stage of your life that help you stay energetically clean and connected to your inner radiance.
Sure. Um,
Or you could answer
wow,
both if you want to answer
I
both.
feel, yeah, I feel surprised. I'll answer the second one first, and then see what's alive for the first.
Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, some things that feel like just like sort of essential to my own health and my own routine. Um, Food, like clean and good quality food. I'll say I did a whole 30 elimination diet about coming up on 10 years ago. And this was a big part of what set the stage for, what became my spiritual awakening. So I really had to get in alignment with just what things worked for me and what didn't. And I had to experiment with that. Um, and so, yeah, keeping a really clean diet is absolutely essential for me. I'm really lucky now to have been off of all prescription medication for about 3 years. I was on some sort of prescribed pharmaceutical for psychiatric reasons for, about 15 years, and was told basically that,
Congratulations.
yeah, thanks, that I would need to keep that up, that I would need to be on medication for the rest of my life in order to have a chance at survival. And I'm really lucky that I now have both not survival, but I have the chance to thrive in a way that I didn't before.
Beautiful.
And medication's absolutely held an important place in my life. And I was not ready to look at getting off of medication until I was ready to let go of sort of everything about the way that my life worked, what my job was, what I ate, what I drank, what I put in my body, what I was spending my time on. It's like until I was ready to go through some sort of metaphorical death and let go of sort of everything that I thought I was. Um, yeah, medications are really essential, and there are people for which I think medications are always going to be important. And I'm really lucky that I've had the resources and the privilege to get through this. Yeah, food is just such a critical part of that. Meditation, like I would like to think it's like a absolute daily practice for me, and it's probably like 5 or 6 out of 7 days a week that I have like a basically first thing in the morning meditation practice. There's a lot of other practices I do. Almost first thing in the morning, just like being able to clear my mind and get in my body before I turn my phone on, before I let the onslaught of like the mindy chaos around me, sort of, interact with my mind.
And is meditation
Um,
for you just like kind of breath watching or body scanning? Like, what does meditation mean for you?
it could be a lot of different things. My like go-to morning practice is and to let go of the mind. And so trying to stay out of thought and just be in presence. And of course it's a practice. So as I notice thoughts, then it's just a question of coming to awareness that that's what's happening and letting go of that thought. Yeah, there's lots of other, meditative things I do, but
Sure.
that one feels like the real, like, simple kind of baseline for me. And yeah, movement practices. Yoga for me has been, the last 13 years or so, a few times a week ideally. And I do best when I sweat. And so, like, hot yoga, yeah, for so many reasons, it just feels like such an important part of my practice. And yeah, you mentioned 3, and like I'll also say that spiritual connection for me. That's the like just connecting to my soul, connecting to Holy Spirit, Great Spirit, God, however one conceptualizes that, as well as connecting to the elements around me. Really like trying to find the embodied sense of the elements of the fire, the water, the earth, the air, the space around me, and to feel really connected to the land, like that I am a part of the earth, that I am supported by the earth. Every time I'm sitting on a chair and I can just remember that, like, oh, the fact that this chair is holding me up is actually evidence that the earth itself is holding me up. I am supported by my home planet. And the more that I can create that conscious relationship, just the better everything else feels, the more I feel supported and ease and flow in life. Yeah.
Cool.
And then, yeah, as far as relationships, yeah, I'll say where I am now is that I am in an open and committed relationship. So I have a partner where we use the term devotional partner to to sort of describe what we're doing, and that's this is not the mother of my children. I would like to have kids. This partner of mine would like to raise children, but has known since she was very young that she doesn't see herself as the one birthing children. And so, yeah, in the sort of openness of what we're talking about in the chance to create a family, yeah, there's a felt sense that I will meet somebody at some point that will actually be the mother of the children. And I don't want to be in any sort of rush around that. I trust that spirit is leading me where I'm supposed to be going, as long as I can like, listen and sort of get out of my own way, figuratively, to like let my mind and ego sort of take a break and feel like I'm being led by spirit. Yeah, and people that have dedicated their lives to living in their own alignment with their values, and ideally that have been studying, working with their own sacred sexuality. That certainly feels like a better fit for me. And yeah, I feel a little surprised by this question. I appreciate you looking out in that way, and yeah, and that's where things are.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, thanks for playing along with it. It just emerged, and it was just felt like a playful way to close it out. And I hope I did not put you too much on the spot. And maybe I'll gift you like a clip of these last 3-4 minutes, which feels like a pretty solid dating bio for you. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of those like things in the newspaper about men running ads on like the London Tube or something, and it actually working out. So maybe this is it for you.
Yeah,
That's my
interesting.
prayer. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'll say just if anybody wants to find me or wants to learn more about me, awakeningancestry.com is my website. And most of what I'm doing this month is hosting a teacher of mine near Esterman who developed shadow constellations, which is working with Jungian shadow work and the technology of constellations as a way to look at our own shadows. And we have a few events coming up. One is online this Friday, May 9th. This is looking at our own place in what's happening in the world and ways that the collective shadow or the collective unconscious might be influencing our own personal experience. So we're calling this Finding Our Poise in the Global Storm. That's free and on Zoom. In Boulder here on May 22nd, we have a one-night workshop with him around shadow work. And then May 29th to June 2nd, he's hosting a 5-day training. This is shadow constellations. So for facilitators, therapists, coaches, basically people that are facilitating the deep work for clients and that understand that their own relationship with their shadow impacts their relationship with their clients, their relationship with their practice, and their ability to grow their business, and that want to be interacting with clients from as clean and conscious of a place as possible. So yeah, we still have some spots open for that training here in Boulder. And yeah, awakeningancestor.com.
Lovely. Yeah. Uh, I have seen these events that you talked about, and they look really intriguing. And I'll be sure to include links to them in the description of this when I publish it out. And yeah, really appreciate diving in on this like really fascinating subject. Truly, like one of the most fascinating subjects that um, like really strokes my curiosity like nothing else at the moment. So I'm really appreciating having a space to drop in with someone who has so much wide experience across modalities and also having gone through some significant life hardships and being able to like navigate your own life to where you're at, and you seem like a wonderful radiant being, and now you're also helping so many clients. I was grateful to receive a session directly from you on compassionate depossession, which was really powerful and inspiring for me and my own journey in offering healing work. So yeah, very mind opening perspectives that I've received from you today, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm sure people who have tuned in today will be appreciating just everything that you've shared. So thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Vignesh. Appreciate the opportunity. Great to chat with you. And yeah, looking forward to however our paths cross weave from here.
Lovely. Okay, I stopped the